Hello everyone, and welcome to my Life in the Universe pandemic series. These are just a series of short talks about topics that I think are interesting about life in the universe. And if you're sitting at home surrounded by this virus, maybe you thought about life in the universe. What does all this mean? So today I want to talk about a topic that's not so much about viruses or bacteria or some of the other interesting things about life in the universe. I want to talk about human life in the universe. I'm going to address this question that I think is interesting. Is the heroic age of exploration over? Now, this may sound like a very strange thing, but I actually do get often asked this question. And you may have noticed it yourself, that if you open a news site or go onto the web and you read about exploration, you'll see things like, so-and-so has become the first person to reach the summit of Everest with a poodle in their rucksack. Or so-and-so has become the first ever person to reach the South Pole on a motorbike traveling backwards with an alpaca on their heads. It just seems to be that the great age of Amundsen and Scott and Shackleton has long since gone, and we're now in an age where it's all about achieving the same old things, but with a slightly different permutation. And I don't think that's an unfair view of exploration. Certainly, many of the great firsts, at least in terms of exploration, not scientifically, but some of the great exploration, geographical exploration firsts are over and have been done. And in that sense, it tends to have become, perhaps to some people's view, and I think in my view, a little bit stale. But what you have to do is to widen your horizons to beyond the Earth. I've no doubt that when humans were sitting in the Great Rift Valley of Africa, when someone had first crossed that valley, then the next person tried to cross that valley and become the first person to cross the Great Rift Valley with a rucksack containing a saber-toothed tiger tooth or something like this. So every generation has its limits, and when you reach those limits, people assume that everything is over, there can be no further progress. So what you have to do is you have to leave aside your views of the Earth and expand your boundaries of exploration to the edges of the solar system, the next boundary, if you like, that humanity might consider as a limit within which it might want to do a new heroic age of exploration. So what are these great feats that are going to be as good as Amundsen and Scott and Shackleton? Well, imagine yourself standing at the edge of the Martian polar ice cap. Mars has great polar ice caps, a bit like our own planet, made of water ice. Every winter, a meter of carbon dioxide snow covers those polar ice caps. And there you are at the edge, standing at the edge of the polar ice cap, looking out across, looking at this sort of raspberry ripple-like landscape with these layers of dust and sand from great Martian dust storms trapped within the ices and snows of the polar ice cap. And from the edge of the polar ice cap, you head out on a multi-month expedition to cross the Martian polar ice cap. And as you go, you might drill into that ice to understand the history of Mars. You might want to look for organic material in that ice, the search for life, or maybe you're just interested in understanding the climatic history of Mars. Within that ice cap are millions of years worth of climate history. You head out every day dragging your sledge. In the evening, you're in a spacesuit, of course, because the atmosphere is lethal. You climb into a tent, you pressurize it, and then once it's pressurized, you can take your spacesuit off, get the stove going, and cook some food and drink a cup of tea. And the next morning, you put your spacesuit back on and you continue across the Martian polar ice cap on your grueling expedition. And then after a month or two, you reach the Martian geographical pole. You have become the first person to complete the unsupported transpolar assault on the Martian geographic North Pole. And you plant a flag and maybe you look out across that landscape and realize that you have done something as extraordinary as Shackleton and Scott. Different environment, the atmosphere is different, but you still had to walk in a spacesuit for hundreds of miles and endure the extremity of an instantaneously lethal environment on that expedition. This is one of the great exploration firsts of our solar system, the first crossing of the Martian North Pole. And you could continue your expedition and complete the first transpolar crossing on Mars. Imagine an overwintering at the Martian pole. Mars has an axis that is tilted like the Earth's. That means that during the summer, the polar ice caps, it's continuously light, and during the winter, it's continuously dark. But because the Martian year is a lot longer than our year, almost twice as long, the Martian polar winter is almost a whole Earth year. Imagine being in a polar station at the Martian North Pole with a meter of carbon dioxide snow gathering around your station as you look out of the window into that extreme environment. These are great exploration first, the first person to overwinter at the Martian North Pole. You could go mountaineering. You could go and climb Mount Everest, or you could go and climb Mount Olympus on Mars, which is 2.5 times the height of Mount Everest. And this is something that people have speculated about for a while. A few years ago, because I'm a bit of a space geek, I asked Marilyn Flynn, who's an American astronomical artist, to paint me the first image of an expedition team at the summit of Mount Olympus. And here is the painting that hangs on my wall at home. It's called the Ascent of Olympus. And what you're looking at here is an expedition team that has reached the summit of Mount Olympus. And there is our famous explorer who is holding up some prayer flags like they do when they climb Everest. There's another person watching what's going on there, and probably a person taking a photograph. And the background to this image is actually real. It's based on satellite imagery of the caldera of Olympus Mons. Now, Olympus Mons is a very different place to explore than Mount Everest. It's a very gradual slope of about 6 degrees. In fact, it would be an intensely boring expedition in some ways, but you would still have to climb these sheer scarp cliffs around the edges of this huge volcano that is hundreds of kilometers across. And you would have to get up to the top of those cliffs and then continue this climb to the summit of Mount Olympus. And then when you get there, you're in these caldera regions where probably water once flowed maybe, or there were great lava flows at the top of this giant volcano many billions of years ago. And you can explore the ancient geology and possibly the astrobiology of those ancient calderas. But never mind, whatever you do about the science, when you stand at the summit of that mountain, you have eclipsed Hillary and Tenzing. You are standing on a mountain 2.5 times the height of Mount Everest. Here's another expedition you could do if you want to be part of this heroic age of solar system exploration. You could complete the first circumnavigation of Mars over both poles, recapitulating the Transglobe expedition that was launched by Ranulph Fiennes in the late 1970s, where the team set off from Greenwich in England, went down to South Africa, crossed Antarctica, went back up across the Americas, crossed the North Pole. You could do the same thing on Mars, a 21,000 kilometer expedition to cross the North Pole of Mars, to round across the deserts of Mars, crossing the South Pole, then summiting Mount Olympus. So you've got Olympus and both poles in your expedition, and then you arrive back at the edge of the Martian North Pole. Imagine that, being the first person to complete the circumnavigation of Mars. So you can see that when we expand our horizons to beyond the Earth, we can indeed see that the age of exploration is not over. And you can imagine the first circumnavigation of the Moon would also be a worthwhile exploration endeavor. And beyond Mars, where else could we go? Well, we could go to Miranda, one of the moons of Uranus, that has a cliff 20 kilometers high. If you were to throw yourself off that cliff, it would take you 10 minutes to reach the bottom because of the low gravity on that moon. Who will be the first person to summit that 20-kilometer high cliff or jump off the top of it? We could imagine going to Titan, where the atmosphere is thicker than the Earth's, about 20% thicker, and the gravity is a lot lower. On Titan, in theory, you could strap wings to your arms and float through the atmosphere. Who will be the first person to take off with wings on the surface of Titan? Who will be the first person to cross a liquid methane lake on Titan? Who will be the first person to circumnavigate that moon over the great dune fields and liquid methane lakes of that moon? The first circumnavigation of Titan. And what about Ganymede and Callisto, the moons of Jupiter, the first person to cross those moons, to circumnavigate those moons? And then right at the edge of the solar system, Pluto. Perhaps people will climb those cliffs of solid nitrogen and methane ices that were seen by the New Horizons space probe, and they will stand at the highest summit of Pluto, the highest mountain at the edge of the solar system, and look back into the interior of the solar system with the sun on the horizon as the first explorers to stand at the summit of that great mountain. So the heroic age of exploration is yet to begin, in fact. The exploits of the great polar explorers, as I say, Amundsen, Scott, Shackleton, and then Hillary and Tenzing and other explorers who climbed the mountains, All of this was in many ways a mere entree. We haven't even reached the main course yet. And one day in the future, there will be people that will write books like this, The Polar Journeys, and this will be called the Martian Polar Journeys. Instead of Shackleton, there will be some name there of someone who we do not yet know. Who is this person? Who is the person who will write the book about the grueling, unsupported transpolar assault on the Martian North Geographical Pole? Who will be the person who will write the book about the first circumnavigation of Mars over both poles? Maybe that person is a little child screaming right now in a little cot in Edinburgh, or in a cot in a hospital in Beijing or in Washington, or some country that is yet to emerge as a world-leading space power. We will be surprised by who the first person is who stands at the summit of Olympus or crosses the Martian North Pole. Is the heroic age of exploration over? Absolutely not. It hasn't even begun. There are great things ahead for our civilization, and one day the stories and exploits of these great explorers will thrill and inspire the hearts of school children across the world, just as Scott and Shackleton's exploits inspired school children in the early 20th century, and in fact, as they should do today in any primary and secondary school in Britain that takes its educational responsibilities seriously. But anyway, in the far future, these sorts of books written from Mars will inspire school children to go out and explore the outer solar system and set new boundaries for humanity and our civilization. So the past exploits on Earth were exciting, but there is even more exciting stuff to come. So look forward to these things. They may not happen in our lifetimes, but over the next 200, 300, 400 years, the exploration of some of the great frontiers of our solar system will happen. Thanks a lot for joining me again. Take care of yourselves. Bye.